The morning began like any other, with the soft chime of my alarm slicing through the quiet of the house. I lay there for a few moments longer than usual, letting the warmth of the covers cling to me, savoring the brief pause before the day officially demanded attention. The sunlight seeped through the thin curtains, scattering in muted patches across the carpet, and I found myself watching the light shift across the floor, almost hypnotized by the slow, steady progress. There was a comfort in this, a rhythm that reminded me everything in my life had an order, a pattern that could be trusted. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my feet sinking slightly into the soft rug. The house was silent, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the occasional creak of the settling foundation. It was ordinary, predictable, safe. I had always found comfort in these small routines, the ordinary cadence of life that allowed me to breathe without fear. Today, like most days, I planned to sit by the kitchen window, sip my tea, and scroll through emails before the world fully pressed its demands upon me. The kettle whistled, breaking the delicate calm. Steam curled upward as I poured the boiling water over the tea leaves, inhaling the familiar earthy aroma. The cup was warm in my hands, grounding me, a small ritual that anchored me to reality. Outside, the birds sang quietly, and the faint rustle of leaves in the wind painted a serene picture that belied the chaos that was about to enter my day. My husband had left early that morning, as he often did during his business trips. At least, that's what I had believed. I watched him drive away yesterday, briefcase in hand, tie slightly loosened, and a tired smile plastered across his face. He waved, and I waved back, waving at a man I thought I knew. Trust was a delicate thing in our home, and ours had always seemed unspoken but solid, an unspoken agreement that the mundane was safe, that the ordinary was ours to cherish. His trips had always been smooth, predictable, absent of any hints of deception. I settled by the window with my tea, the soft morning light filtering across my face, casting shadows that made me squint slightly. The world outside seemed gentle, welcoming, and entirely ordinary. I scrolled through emails, responded to a few, deleted some junk, all the while feeling the quiet satisfaction that comes from productivity without pressure. There was a rhythm to these mornings, a peace that had settled around me like a comfortable shawl. And then the phone rang. At first, I thought nothing of it. A routine call, perhaps a wrong number, but the voice on the other end shattered the calm like glass hitting concrete. "Ma'am," said the woman's voice, formal and clipped, "your husband is here at the bank." "With a woman who looks like you." I froze mid-breath, tea halfway to my lips. The warmth of the cup seemed to vanish, leaving only a cold, creeping sensation crawling up my spine. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the words with the reality I had always trusted. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaking, betraying the composed image I always worked so hard to maintain. "There's a woman here," the bank employee repeated, more slowly this time, as if realizing the gravity of the statement. "She looks like you, your husband is with her. He was supposed to be on a business trip, correct?" My grip tightened around the cup, fingers whitening against the ceramic. The room suddenly felt smaller, suffocating, as though the walls themselves were leaning in to witness my unraveling. I could hear the ticking of the kitchen clock, each second a hammer against my chest. My heart thudded, erratic and loud, drowning out everything else. It couldn't be true. There must be some mistake, some elaborate confusion. A twin, a look-alike? My mind grasped for any logical explanation, any narrative that could preserve the fragile illusion of security I had held onto so dearly. I sank into the chair, the weight of disbelief pressing down on me. The tea had gone cold in my hand, forgotten, yet I couldn't bring myself to move. Every instinct screamed at me to act, to demand answers, to confront this impossible truth, but the rational part of me fought back. Maybe it's just a misunderstanding. Maybe it's someone who coincidentally resembles me. Surely, my husband, he couldn't. And yet, deep down, a seed of doubt had already been planted, insidious and creeping. There had been little things, almost imperceptible, moments that in hindsight carried the faintest hint of distance or secrecy. A phone call he had taken privately. A hurried glance at a text message he quickly hid. A weekend that seemed slightly longer than it should have been, though I had attributed it to the stresses of his work. And now, that seed had erupted into a thorny, jagged reality that threatened to pierce every comforting illusion I had built around my life. I replayed his words, his smiles, the way he had kissed me goodbye, all of it looping in my mind like a film I wished I could stop. How could the ordinary dissolve into the extraordinary in a single moment? How could trust, so carefully nurtured over years, be shattered by a single phone call? The bank employee's voice continued, a distant echo now, filtered through the haze of shock. "Do you want me to hold them there until you arrive?" I barely heard her, my thoughts spiraling. My hands trembled, setting the cup down with a soft clatter. I felt unmoored, as though the floor beneath me had given way, leaving me suspended in a void of fear and disbelief. My mind grasped at fragments of reassurance. Perhaps he's explaining, perhaps there's some logical reason. But even as I clung to that thought, the fragile lattice of my trust trembled, cracking under the weight of uncertainty. Time seemed to distort. Moments stretched endlessly, the ordinary morning I had anticipated dissolving into a landscape of fear and speculation. I tried to breathe, tried to center myself, but the images my mind conjured were relentless. My husband's face, the stranger who looked like me, the impossible scenario now becoming terrifyingly plausible. I thought of our home, our quiet routines, the dinners we had shared, the laughter that had filled these walls. Could it all have been an illusion? Had I been blind to signs that were there all along, hidden beneath the comfort of normalcy? The phone call had not just shattered the calm, it had unmasked it as fragile, temporary, a delicate fiction that could be torn apart with a few words. My fingers clutched the edge of the table, knuckles white, as I tried to summon some rationality. But the heart refuses reason when betrayal looms so close, and every memory, every familiar gesture, suddenly seemed suspect. I wanted to scream, to cry, to shake myself awake from this nightmare, but the voice caught in my throat, silenced by the sheer weight of disbelief. And yet, beneath the shock, a different emotion stirred, a primal need to know, to see, to confront the truth. Even as fear coursed through me, demanding retreat, another part of me demanded action. The ordinary morning had ended. The world I knew, the life I had trusted, had been irrevocably altered in a single phone call. The tea had long since cooled, forgotten, as I rose from the chair, legs unsteady beneath me. Every step toward the door felt heavy, laden with the anticipation of the unknown, a journey into a reality I had never imagined I would face. The sun continued to stream through the window, indifferent to the turmoil within, and I realized that ordinary mornings, no matter how comforting, can vanish without warning, leaving behind only questions, doubt, and the urgent, unrelenting need to confront a truth that refuses to be ignored. The illusion of security, I understood then, is fragile. It exists in the small routines, the whispered reassurances, the unquestioned trust that life will continue in its predictable rhythm. And in that moment, with the bank's words ringing in my ears, I realized that all of it, the calm, the ordinary, the trust, could crumble in an instant. I paused at the threshold of the door, hand on the doorknob, staring at the street beyond my home. The world outside appeared unchanged, serene, yet I knew nothing would ever feel the same again. My husband's supposed business trip, the very element that had anchored my trust, had now become the stage for uncertainty and fear. The ordinary day that had begun with tea and sunlight had dissolved into a precarious landscape of suspicion and dread, and I had no choice but to step forward into a reality I was unprepared to navigate. The moment the words left the bank employee's lips, a cold numbness settled over me. It was as if the world had tilted on its axis, and I was caught somewhere between disbelief and horror, unable to grasp the reality that had been thrust into my life. I sank back into the chair, my hands pressed to my face, heart hammering against my ribs like a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Each beat seemed louder than the last, echoing inside my skull, reverberating through the hollow spaces of my chest, leaving me disoriented, breathless. I could hear the faint, distant sounds of the house around me, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft creak of floorboards settling, but they seemed unreal, as if I were listening to them through a glass barrier. Nothing felt real. Nothing felt familiar. My mind clung desperately to fragments of reason, seeking a thread to pull myself back to the life I had always known. But the words from the bank had planted a seed of doubt so insidious, so gnawing, that it threatened to unravel every certainty I had ever held. It must be a mistake, I told myself, over and over, like a mantra. Someone had miscommunicated, misidentified. Surely they couldn't have meant my husband, the man I had lived with, trusted, loved for so many years. Perhaps it was another woman, someone unrelated, and my mind had twisted reality to fit a nightmare scenario. Perhaps. And yet, even as I clung to this fragile hope, the images began to creep into my mind, unbidden and relentless. His face, calm and smiling, in places he should have been working. The way he had kissed me goodbye yesterday morning, brief but tender, the half smile that had never seemed out of place. I replayed his words, his tone, the subtle nuances of his gestures, now suspicious under the harsh light of doubt. It was terrifying to realize that trust could be so easily questioned, that love could be so suddenly rendered uncertain. I thought back to the past few months, trying to pinpoint moments that might have hinted at some hidden reality, moments I had conveniently overlooked or rationalized away. The late nights at the office, the brief, secretive phone calls, the sudden interest in new hobbies or outings I wasn't invited to. I remembered the weekend he claimed to have spent with colleagues, a vague explanation about extended meetings and client dinners. At the time, I had accepted it, unthinking, assuming it was normal, routine, necessary. And now those memories hovered in my mind like shadows, each one a potential clue to an elaborate deception I hadn't yet fully grasped. My body responded before my mind could catch up. Trembling gripped my hands, making them shake as I clutched the edge of the kitchen table. My legs felt weak, unsteady, as if they might give way beneath me at any moment. The tea I had poured only minutes earlier had gone cold, forgotten, the warmth now replaced by an icy knot coiling in my stomach. My chest tightened, constricting my breathing, making it difficult to draw in air, each inhale shallow, insufficient, and trembling with panic. I tried to speak aloud to reassure myself with sound, but my voice was barely a whisper. "It can't be, it's a mistake. It has to be someone else." The words echoed in the empty kitchen, hollow and unconvincing, as if even my own voice refused to believe them. The denial was fierce, instinctive, a protective shield against the unbearable truth. Denial allowed me to imagine an alternate reality, a world where the ordinary morning had not been shattered, where trust remained intact, and where love had not been compromised by the specter of betrayal. And yet, even in denial, the mind is relentless, probing, questioning. Shadows of fear crept into the edges of my consciousness, whispering possibilities I could not dismiss. What if it wasn't a mistake? What if the bank employee had seen clearly, had reported accurately? The thought made my stomach twist into knots, a visceral reaction that no amount of reasoning could soothe. I wanted to scream, to shake myself awake from the nightmare that was unfolding with such surreal precision. But fear and disbelief rendered me silent, mute, suspended in the liminal space between knowledge and denial. I moved to the window, seeking the outside world as an anchor. The street was quiet, serene, bathed in the soft light of morning. Neighbors were going about their routines, unaware of the chaos threatening to unravel my life. A bird landed on the fence, hopping delicately, pecking at crumbs. It was ordinary, banal, almost mocking in its normalcy. Life outside continued, indifferent to the storm that raged within me. I pressed my hands to the glass, staring at the tiny creature, wishing desperately that I could step out into a world where nothing had changed, where my husband was still the man I trusted him to be, where the ordinary day had not collapsed into uncertainty. Flashbacks surged like waves, unbidden and relentless. I remembered a conversation from weeks ago, small and seemingly inconsequential, yet now pregnant with meaning. He had spoken of a client dinner, mentioning colleagues I had never met, locations I had never visited. At the time, I had accepted his explanations, brushing away any lingering unease as the paranoia of an overthinking mind. But now, with the bank's words hanging over me like a storm cloud, each memory seemed tainted, each detail a potential sign of hidden truths I had been blind to. I found myself retracing our past interactions with obsessive scrutiny. The way he sometimes left the room abruptly to take a call. The brief text messages he would delete before I could see them. The minor discrepancies in his schedule that I had dismissed as trivial. How could I have been so blind, I wondered, to the subtle currents that hinted at a life running parallel to the one I thought we shared? Denial fought against these thoughts, but the seed of suspicion had already taken root, sprouting tendrils that wrapped around every recollection, every memory, leaving me feeling both betrayed and foolish. Tears threatened, unbidden, pooling in my eyes. I pressed a hand to my mouth, trying to stifle them, trying to maintain composure even as my world threatened to collapse. It was not just shock I felt, but the raw, searing pain of betrayal, a pain that strikes deepest when it comes from those closest to us, from the person we believed would never choose deception over love. The intimacy of years of marriage, the trust I had placed so completely in his presence, now seemed like fragile glass, shattered and irreparable in a moment of reckoning. I moved through the house almost mechanically, each step heavy with dread. The floorboards creaked beneath my weight, each sound amplified in the quiet, filling the space with a haunting cadence. I picked up my phone, staring at it as if willing it to offer some answer, some explanation that could restore order to the chaos. But the screen remained inert, cold, indifferent, reflecting back my own wide-eyed horror. The phone call from the bank had severed the tether that bound me to normalcy, and I was left adrift in a sea of uncertainty, clinging to denial as my only lifeline. I tried to reason with myself, to piece together a scenario that could explain the impossibility. Perhaps it was a twin. Perhaps a colleague of his had a relative who resembled me, and the bank employee had made a mistake. Perhaps there was an innocent explanation that would render the nightmare unreal. I clung to these thoughts desperately, whispering them to myself as though repetition could transform possibility into reality. But the body does not lie. Trembling hands, a racing heart, shallow breaths, they betrayed me even as my mind sought refuge in denial. The mind can concoct explanations, but the body reacts to truth even when the conscious self refuses to acknowledge it. My reflection in the window stared back at me, eyes wide, lips pressed tight, and I did not recognize the person I saw. She was a woman caught between disbelief and terror, between love and suspicion, suspended in a liminal space that offered no comfort, no certainty. Hours passed, though they felt like minutes, time stretching and contracting in a disorienting rhythm. I replayed the bank's words endlessly, trying to hear some nuance I might have missed, some signal that could confirm that it was a mistake. But there was no reprieve, no easing of the tension that gripped my chest. The ordinary life I had known, the routines, the trust, the predictable cadence of mornings and evenings, had evaporated, leaving behind only the raw, unrelenting pain of doubt and the cold grip of betrayal. I remembered a quiet morning months ago when he had seemed distant, distracted by something he would not share. I had asked questions then, small, innocuous questions about work, about colleagues, about plans for the weekend. He had smiled, brushed me off, reassured me that it was nothing, that I needn't worry. At the time, I had believed him, accepting his words as truth. Now those reassurances seemed like lies, carefully constructed to conceal some hidden reality that I was only now beginning to glimpse. Denial still clung to me, a fragile shield against the unbearable weight of truth. It whispered that I must be mistaken, that I had misheard, misinterpreted. It offered the illusion of safety, a temporary reprieve from the emotional maelstrom that threatened to consume me. And yet, the seed of doubt had grown beyond containment, spreading tendrils into every corner of my consciousness, leaving me both terrified and compelled to uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. I sank to the floor, back against the wall, knees drawn to my chest, and let the tears come. Silent at first, then in small, stuttering sobs that shook my frame. The ordinary day had ended, dissolved into a landscape of suspicion, fear, and disbelief. Every heartbeat was a reminder that life as I knew it had been irrevocably altered, that trust had been compromised, and that the person I believed closest to me might be capable of unimaginable betrayal. The bank's words reverberated endlessly in my mind, refusing to fade. I could no longer deny their weight, nor could I fully embrace them. I was caught in the liminal space between denial and knowledge, between love and suspicion, suspended in a reality that demanded reckoning but offered no clarity. And in that suspended state, I realized that betrayal, when it comes from those we trust most, hits with a force that leaves us unmoored, vulnerable, and painfully, irrevocably human. The first thing I did after the initial shock had somewhat settled into a cold, heavy numbness was reach for the phone again. My hands shook slightly as I dialed the bank's number, each tone of the ringing echoing in my ears like a drumbeat heralding some dark revelation. I tried to steady my breathing, inhaling slowly and forcing my fingers to grip the phone firmly, but there was no way to mask the tremor that betrayed the panic coiling inside me. This was the first act in a journey I had not asked for, a step into a reality that threatened to unravel the life I had carefully built. When the call was answered, I felt almost dizzy with anticipation. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and utterly indifferent to the chaos churning inside me. "Yes, ma'am, how can I help you?" I hesitated, struggling to form the words. I need more information," I managed finally, voice tight, trembling despite my efforts to sound composed. About the woman with my husband. Please, can you tell me what's happening?" There was a pause, a careful calculation in the silence before the bank employee spoke again. "Ma'am, I can only give you limited details over the phone. He is here at the counter, and the woman is, well, she resembles you. That is all I can confirm without breaching privacy." My heart lurched. Resembles me? The words spun in my mind like a carousel stuck in motion. I could not make sense of them. The fact that she resembled me was somehow worse than if she had been a stranger. It suggested an intentionality, a deliberate mirroring that made the possibility of coincidence almost impossible. I gripped the phone tighter, knuckles white, feeling as though it were the only tether holding me to some fragile sense of control. I need to see him, I whispered, though the words sounded weak even to my own ears. Can I speak to him? There was another pause. Ma'am, I'm afraid I cannot put him on the phone. You would have to come in personally. I hung up, the dial tone cutting through the room like a knife. I sat back, trying to think, to breathe, to map out the next steps. My mind began to race uncontrollably, conjuring scenarios that made my stomach twist. Perhaps she was a coworker, a client, someone with an uncanny resemblance. Perhaps this was some misunderstanding, some bureaucratic mistake. But beneath every rational explanation lurked the gnawing suspicion that none of it was innocent. My mind pictured them together, talking, laughing, smiling, the intimacy of proximity I was forbidden to witness. I tried to remember the last few weeks, scanning my memories for anomalies, for subtle changes in behavior that I might have ignored. There had been the late nights at the office, certainly, but nothing out of the ordinary had seemed suspicious at the time. I recalled conversations that had been unusually brief, hurried, as though he were hiding something, but I had brushed them off as stress or fatigue. Now each recollection was tinged with doubt, the innocent explanations twisting into shadows of deceit. I reached out to a close friend first, careful to keep my words vague. Hey, have you noticed anything unusual with husband's name lately? I asked, trying to mask the panic in my voice with casual concern. My friend paused. Unusual how? Just behavior, work stuff maybe, I don't know, just different. They laughed lightly, the kind of laugh that made me ache with envy at their obliviousness. Different? Well, you know him, maybe he's stressed. Men have moods, you know, nothing to worry about. I thanked them, forcing a calm I did not feel, and hung up. Even as I smiled and nodded at my own reflection in the mirror, a gnawing unease persisted, a cold claw digging into my chest. I knew that they could not and would not understand. This was something I had to face alone. The investigation was mine alone to conduct. I turned my attention back to the days leading up to this moment, piecing together his unusual behavior like a puzzle whose image I was terrified to see complete. There had been the trip he supposedly made last week, the one he said would keep him in meetings late into the evening. Yet I remembered a message he sent, innocuous and casual, from an address I could not place. A colleague? A hotel? I could not be certain. The details were fleeting, elusive, slipping through my fingers like smoke. I recalled another evening, a simple dinner at home. He had seemed distracted, his mind elsewhere. A text alert had made him flinch, his smile flickering for a moment before he recovered. I had not thought much of it then. I had trusted him implicitly. Now I revisited the memory, the small tremor in his hand, the rapid glance at the screen, the sudden shift in mood. It all felt like evidence, tiny cracks forming in the solid wall of familiarity I had relied upon. Fear, curiosity, and a desperate need for clarity propelled me forward. I began to plan my visit to the bank. What would I say? What would I do when I saw them together? My mind constructed scenarios so vivid, so detailed, that I could see them as clearly as if I were watching a film. My husband's face, calm, collected, smiling at this other woman. The way she mirrored me, perhaps mimicking my gestures, my expressions, my very presence. I shuddered at the thought, gripping the edge of the table, my knuckles burning white. Yet even as the dread tightened around my chest, there was a flicker of resolve. I had to know. I could not remain suspended in this purgatory of uncertainty, a spectator to the unfolding of my own life. Every instinct screamed at me to confront, to demand answers, to reclaim the clarity that had been stripped away in an instant. I called another friend, this time someone closer to my husband, someone who might offer insight without judgment. Have you noticed anything unusual with him? I asked cautiously, careful not to reveal too much, careful to frame it as casual curiosity. There was a pause. Not really, they said finally, though the hesitation was palpable. Why, did something happen? Nothing, I said quickly, forcing a laugh I did not feel. Just curious. You know, sometimes we notice little things. The conversation ended inconclusively, leaving me more unsettled than before. My need for truth was growing, pressing in from every angle, and yet the answers seemed maddeningly out of reach. Every unanswered question, every vague response, added layers of tension that wrapped around my mind like a vice, squeezing until I could hardly think clearly. I began to reconstruct the timeline of his recent movements, the trips, the meetings, the evenings spent working late. Each recollection was painstakingly examined, cross-referenced against what I had observed, what messages I had seen, what stories he had told. Tiny inconsistencies emerged, small gaps in his narrative that had seemed trivial at the time but now loomed large. My mind catalogued them meticulously, every detail a potential clue, every half-truth a possible explanation of what might be happening. Sleep became impossible. Nights stretched endlessly as I lay awake, eyes wide, mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. I imagined confrontations, arguments, confessions, denials. I imagined seeing him with her, the betrayal laid bare before my eyes, the intimate familiarity between them making my stomach twist into knots. I could feel my pulse quicken with each imagined scene, each one more vivid than the last. The ordinary world I had known was gone, replaced by a haze of fear, doubt, and unrelenting curiosity. I revisited conversations we had shared over dinner, casual chats, mundane exchanges that had once seemed safe, ordinary. Were there hidden meanings, subtle hints, glimpses of a secret life I had been blind to? Each memory was scrutinized under a new lens, every gesture reevaluated. His laughter, his tone, his expressions, all were now suspect, each potentially a mask, a performance hiding a truth I was only beginning to sense. The hours stretched into days. I called the bank again, seeking confirmation, asking for details, trying to extract information without revealing my panic. Each interaction left me more anxious, more desperate, more consumed by the need to uncover the truth. I checked my husband's messages, his social media activity, anything that might offer a clue, a sign, a fragment of reality to anchor myself. And everywhere I looked, the threads of doubt multiplied, weaving a web that threatened to entangle me completely. Even mundane tasks became impossible to focus on. Cooking, cleaning, even drinking my tea, the rituals that had once grounded me, now felt hollow, meaningless, overshadowed by the gnawing anxiety that had taken root in every corner of my mind. I replayed conversations in my head endlessly, trying to detect patterns, inconsistencies, any hint of a hidden narrative. I questioned my own judgment, my ability to perceive reality. Had I been blind for so long? Had I missed the signs that were staring me in the face all along? Friends and family offered advice when I cautiously reached out, yet none could fully comprehend the intensity of the uncertainty, the way it clawed at my chest and coiled around my mind. They suggested patience, trust, faith, but I knew that patience alone would not restore the fractured trust, and faith felt hollow in the absence of clarity. I had to see for myself. I had to investigate, to uncover, to confront, to reclaim some semblance of control over a life that was slipping further from my grasp with every passing moment. As I prepared to leave for the bank, the weight of anticipation pressed down on me like a physical force. Every step, every movement, was charged with the electric tension of what I was about to face. I imagined their faces, their expressions, the way they might react when confronted with the woman I was, him confronted with the reality of my knowledge, her confronted with the truth of her duplicity, if duplicity indeed existed. I paused at the threshold of the door, taking a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. I knew that once I stepped out, there would be no turning back. I was entering a space of revelation, a crucible where the ordinary rhythms of my life would collide with the possibility of betrayal, with the reality of deception. The drive to the bank was a blur of thoughts, fear, and anger, each one colliding with the other in an unrelenting storm. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, and I could feel my heartbeat in my temples. Every scenario played out in vivid, terrifying detail in my mind. Him smiling with her, sharing private jokes, gestures that I thought had belonged only to our marriage, now mirrored with someone else. I forced myself to breathe, telling myself to remain calm, to keep some semblance of control, yet every fiber of my being screamed otherwise. I arrived at the bank, the familiar facade now appearing menacing, a place that had once been mundane now transformed into a stage for confrontation. I could see them inside through the large glass windows, their figures moving with casual familiarity that made my stomach knot. My heart leapt, then sank. There he was, smiling, talking. And there she was, or at least, the woman who looked like me, an uncanny reflection, sitting beside him as though she had always belonged. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, as I stepped through the door. Each footstep echoed in the tiled hall, a drumbeat marking my approach toward a truth I was unprepared to face. I felt my palms grow sweaty, my body tense like a coiled spring ready to snap. I rehearsed my words silently, trying to balance the trembling fury inside me with the need to appear composed. My anger had to be masked, carefully wrapped in controlled tones, lest I give away the vulnerability that lay just beneath the surface. "Honey," I called, my voice steady despite the storm raging within. He turned, and for a fleeting moment, the smile on his face faltered. There was a flash of recognition, and then something harder, defensive, as if he sensed the accusation before the words even left my lips. "Hey, what are you doing here?" he asked, voice casual, as though the world had not shifted beneath us both. "I could ask you the same," I said, stepping closer, forcing my eyes to meet his. "Who is she?" He blinked rapidly, swallowing, and for a moment I thought he would deny it outright, claim it was some misunderstanding. "She's just someone I know," he said finally, carefully, almost rehearsed, his eyes darting away from mine. "Just someone you know?" I repeated, letting the disbelief hang in the air. My tone was controlled, but the edge of steel was there. Every word carried the weight of betrayal, every syllable a carefully measured probe into the truth I was desperate to uncover. "Because the bank called me and said you were here with a woman who looks like me. How exactly does that qualify as just someone you know?" He shifted uncomfortably, the casual facade beginning to crumble. It's complicated," he said finally, his voice low, almost apologetic, though not quite a confession. "I didn't mean for you to find out like this." I felt my stomach twist. Complicated. The word dripped with deception, a veiled admission that confirmed my worst fears without offering clarity. My mind raced, spinning through scenarios, replaying memories, searching for the cracks I had ignored. The casual dinners, the evenings he had spent away, the texts he had hidden, all now part of a mosaic that pointed toward something I could hardly bear to name. "Complicated?" I echoed, voice rising slightly, though I forced it back down into measured calm. "Do you have any idea what it feels like to hear from a stranger that my husband is here with a woman who looks like me? Complicated doesn't even begin to cover it." He sighed, rubbing his face with one hand. I know it looks bad. But it's not what you think." "Not what I think?" I asked incredulously, stepping closer. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what I think. It looks like betrayal. It looks like lies. It looks like everything we built together is a sham." He flinched at the words, and I realized then that the confrontation was doing something. It was cracking the armor he had built around himself. But his eyes held defensiveness, a subtle deflection that was both infuriating and heartbreaking. He wasn't admitting outright, he wasn't apologizing fully. He was navigating the conversation carefully, perhaps hoping to redirect, to minimize, to control the fallout. "Listen," he said finally, voice steady but tense. She's not, I mean, it's not what it looks like. I can explain if you'll just listen." "Explain?" I interrupted, cutting through the feigned calm he tried to maintain. "You want to explain standing there while holding hands with her, smiling as though none of this matters. Do you understand what this does to me? To us?" I could see the conflict in his eyes now, the small flicker of guilt that betrayed the partial truth he had tried to hide. And yet, his defensive posture remained, a thin wall of words and gestures designed to shield him from accountability. My mind battled the raw pain of betrayal with the remnants of love I still clung to, desperate to reconcile the man I had married with the actions before me. "Do you even hear me?" I asked, voice breaking despite my efforts. "Do you understand what it feels like to watch you with someone else, even if you claim it's not what it looks like? Do you understand the trust that's been shattered?" He hesitated, eyes darting away, then back. I never meant for it to happen like this. I didn't plan for you to find out." The words were soft, but they carried weight. Not a full confession, not an apology that could heal the breach, but an acknowledgement that something had gone wrong, that the world I thought I knew had been altered irrevocably. My emotions swirled, a maelstrom of love, anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. I wanted to scream, to cry, to shake him until he understood the depth of the pain he had inflicted. And yet, I also wanted to understand, to uncover the truth that had been carefully concealed behind lies and partial truths. I forced myself to breathe, to steady the trembling in my hands. "Look at me," I said softly, though the steel in my tone made him flinch. "I need to know the truth, all of it. Not half, not excuses, not deflections. The truth." He ran a hand through his hair, his gaze dropping to the floor, and for a moment the defenses fell just enough to reveal the man behind the facade. I don't know how to say it," he admitted, voice low, almost a whisper. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." You didn't what?" I asked sharply, my own voice rising with the tension that coiled inside me. "I need words, not hesitation. I need clarity, not evasion. Are you saying you've been with her? That you've betrayed me?" He looked up then, eyes full of a mixture of fear, regret, and something I could not name. I didn't plan it. It's complicated. I care about you. I love you. But yes, there's been involvement. I never thought you'd find out like this. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled back slightly, heart hammering in my chest, a wave of nausea and disbelief washing over me. My mind screamed, my body trembled, yet some part of me clung to rationality, trying to parse the meaning, trying to understand the motives behind the actions that had so violently upended my sense of reality. Tears blurred my vision, and I pressed my hands to my face, trying to hold myself together. The man I loved, the man I had trusted implicitly, stood before me, confessing a truth I had never imagined confronting. And yet, even in the face of betrayal, a small, stubborn part of me refused to crumble completely. I could feel it, the part of me that demanded dignity, that refused to be wholly consumed by anger or despair. I would face this truth without losing myself, even if every fiber of my being ached with heartbreak. Why? I asked, voice barely audible. Why? Was it about her? About me, about what we have, he hesitated, looking down. It's complicated, he repeated, a defense I had long ago learned to recognize. But there was something else in his eyes now, a flicker of remorse, a hint of understanding that he had crossed a boundary he could not uncross. I don't expect you to forgive me. I needed you to know. The weight of the moment pressed down on me. Love and betrayal warred within me, each emotion vying for dominance. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to demand justice. But I also wanted to understand, to process, to reclaim the clarity that had been stolen. My hands unclenched slightly, my breathing slowed, though the tension never fully released. You should have told me, I said finally, voice trembling but firm. We could have faced this differently, but instead, I had to find out through a stranger. Through a call that shattered everything I believed about our life together. He nodded, silently acknowledging the truth of my words. And in that silent acknowledgement, a fragile bridge formed between us, not trust, not forgiveness, but the first tentative step toward facing reality together. The confrontation had begun, exposing truths long hidden, and though the road ahead was uncertain, I felt a small, stubborn flicker of strength within me. I realized then that facing harsh truths does not mean losing yourself. It means standing in the storm, heart racing, hands trembling, and still choosing to confront the reality, no matter how painful. It means acknowledging betrayal, acknowledging love, and finding the space to navigate the storm with eyes wide open. The house was silent when I returned, but it was not the comforting silence I had known before. It was thick, heavy, almost oppressive, pressing down on my chest with every step I took. The air seemed charged, as if the walls themselves remembered what had happened at the bank, echoing the confrontation that had shattered the illusion of security I had clung to for so long. I dropped my keys on the counter and leaned against it, my forehead pressed to the cool surface, letting the initial tremor of adrenaline ebb just enough to leave the raw, searing pain in its wake. My mind refused to settle. It replayed the confrontation endlessly, fragment by fragment. His hesitant words, the partial admissions, the fleeting flicker of guilt, I analyzed every syllable, every gesture, trying to extract some sense from the chaos. But clarity eluded me. Each memory raised more questions than answers, each glance or tone dissected revealed layers of uncertainty I had not anticipated. I felt suspended in a void between knowledge and understanding, grief and anger, love and disillusionment. I wandered through the rooms, touching familiar objects as if their presence could anchor me to the life I thought I knew. The kitchen, where we had shared countless meals and quiet conversations, now felt strange, almost alien. The sofa in the living room, once a place of comfort, was now a stage for replaying imagined scenes of betrayal. Even the bedroom, our most private sanctuary, carried the weight of uncertainty, the knowledge that trust had been fractured, perhaps irreparably. I sank onto the couch, wrapping my arms around myself, and let the first wave of tears come. Tears rolled freely down my cheeks, burning my eyes, each one a testament to the depth of heartbreak I felt. I pressed my palms to my face, trying to stifle the sobs, but the grief was insistent, demanding acknowledgement. It was not just sadness, but a complex, interwoven tapestry of betrayal, disappointment, anger, and disbelief. I thought of the years we had spent building a life together, the shared dreams, the routines, the moments of intimacy and understanding. Each memory, once a source of joy, now carried a subtle sting of doubt, a whisper that perhaps nothing was as it had seemed. I began to sift through the past, examining the marriage through a lens I had never before considered. I recalled conversations, casual remarks, fleeting gestures that had previously seemed innocuous. His phone calls late at night, dismissed as work-related stress. The occasional secretive smile or sudden change in mood, which I had rationalized as fatigue or concern. Every overlooked detail now pressed upon me with a weight that was almost unbearable. I questioned myself. Had I been blind, naive, too trusting? And yet, even in that self-questioning, I recognized the inherent vulnerability of love, its power to both nourish and expose, to protect and betray. I walked to the window and stared out at the familiar street, trying to find some external stability to offset the storm within. Children played on the sidewalk, neighbors carried on with their routines, cars passed with ordinary predictability. Life continued around me with startling normalcy, indifferent to the upheaval inside my own world. And yet, I could not find comfort in their ordinariness. The normalcy outside felt like a stark contrast to the turbulence within, highlighting the fragility of the life I had once taken for granted. To process the emotions, I sought a quiet space where I could confront them honestly. I retrieved my journal, the pages blank yet waiting, and began to write, attempting to translate the raw tumult of thoughts into something tangible. Each sentence was a struggle, each word a fragment of clarity amid chaos. I wrote about the confrontation, detailing his words, his demeanor, the flicker of guilt I had witnessed. I wrote about the woman who resembled me, the strangeness of seeing myself reflected in someone else in such an intimate context. I wrote about my fear, my anger, my lingering love, and the bewildering mixture of emotions that made it difficult to breathe at times. Journaling became both a lifeline and a mirror. In writing, I found a space where I could confront the pain without the need for performance, without the pressure of social expectation or imposed understanding. I allowed myself to be honest, unfiltered, vulnerable. And in that honesty, I began to recognize patterns, to understand the interplay of emotions, to identify the underlying truths I had been struggling to articulate. The act of documenting my pain was a subtle reclaiming of agency, a small but vital step toward self-preservation amidst the emotional storm. Yet, reflection brought not only clarity, but also waves of anger that surged unpredictably. I imagined scenarios in which I confronted him again, demanding truth and accountability. I pictured dialogues that would leave no room for ambiguity, moments of raw confrontation where deception could no longer be shielded behind vague explanations. Anger was both a warning and a tool, a reminder that betrayal is not just an intellectual puzzle, but an emotional violation that demands recognition, boundary setting, and personal integrity. I revisited moments of intimacy, recalling laughter, quiet conversations, and small gestures of affection that had once seemed ordinary. Each memory was now reframed, tinged with doubt. Was there deceit hidden beneath the surface? Had certain actions been performed with ulterior motives? I wrestled with these questions, recognizing the delicate balance between introspection and obsession. The past was a minefield, but avoiding it entirely was impossible. Understanding the betrayal required revisiting memories I might otherwise have cherished uncritically. During this period of reflection, I also sought the solace of nature. I walked through the quiet streets, through the park near my home, letting the rhythm of footsteps ground me. The crisp air, the rustle of leaves, the distant laughter of children. It was a reminder that life continued beyond the confines of my private pain. Yet even in this solace, I carried the burden of heartbreak, the constant, nagging awareness that the foundation of my trust had been shaken. Each step became a negotiation between grief and resilience, between despair and the stubborn spark of self-preservation. In conversation with a confidant, I explored fragments of the situation without fully revealing the details. Sometimes, people you trust do things you can't understand, I said, voice low, almost a whisper. And it hurts more than anything else because it comes from the place you thought was safe. Their silence was comforting, not because it offered solutions, but because it mirrored my experience, acknowledgement without judgment, presence without imposition. Even partial understanding was valuable in the process of reflection and healing. I recognized that heartbreak is not a passive experience. It demands engagement, emotional labor, and introspection. Each moment of pain required attention, each wave of grief needed space to exist. To bypass or suppress these feelings would be to deny the reality of betrayal and the humanity of emotional response. I allowed myself to feel, fully and without reservation, knowing that in embracing the pain, I also reclaimed agency over my inner world. As days turned into nights and nights into quiet mornings, the initial shock softened into a complex, layered awareness. I understood that the confrontation had been a necessary turning point, but it was only the beginning. Reflection revealed the nuances of my relationship, the fragility of trust, and the depth of my own resilience. I considered what had been lost, what could be rebuilt, and what boundaries I needed to assert in order to preserve my sense of self. I began to notice the subtle shifts within myself, a heightened awareness of my emotions, a sharper discernment of motives and intentions, a deeper understanding of the interplay between love, trust, and vulnerability. Pain, I realized, is a mirror. It reflects not only the betrayal or the external violation, but also the core of self-worth and the capacity to endure, to process, and eventually to heal. I was forced to confront my own limits, my own expectations, and my own power in a situation that had stripped away the comfort of certainty. I continued journaling, walking, and reflecting, each practice reinforcing the others. Writing allowed for clarity, walking provided space for emotional processing, and quiet reflection offered perspective. I documented the moments of heartbreak, the flashes of anger, the fleeting pangs of hope, and the persistent undertow of confusion. In doing so, I created a record not just of the betrayal, but of my own resilience, a testament to the human capacity to endure emotional upheaval without losing the essence of self. I confronted the duality of love and betrayal, recognizing that the two are often intertwined in ways that challenge comprehension. The act of loving deeply exposes one to profound vulnerability, and betrayal exploits that vulnerability with devastating effect. Yet within the pain, there is also an opportunity to examine one's own boundaries, to assert agency, to navigate the emotional terrain with awareness and intentionality. Reflection, then, became not just a processing of heartbreak, but an exercise in reclaiming power, even in the midst of loss. I revisited the marriage in my mind, reconstructing the narrative from multiple perspectives. I considered not only his actions but my own perceptions, assumptions, and choices. I examined where trust had been established, how it had been reinforced, and where it had been fragile. This exercise was not about assigning blame solely to him, but about understanding the dynamics at play, the complexity of human relationships, and the interplay of expectation, desire, and vulnerability. Each reflection was punctuated by waves of sorrow, each recollection tinged with the ache of disappointment. And yet, slowly, imperceptibly, a sense of grounding began to emerge. I recognized that heartbreak, while painful, is also a crucible, a test of resilience and an affirmation of self-worth. The very act of enduring, of reflecting, of confronting difficult truths is itself a testament to strength, courage, and emotional intelligence. I began to imagine the path forward, cautious but determined. Boundaries would need to be set. Decisions would need to be made. And yet, the process of reflection and pain was not merely a prelude to action. It was an essential act in itself, a journey towards self-knowledge and emotional autonomy. I began to see that survival was not about returning to the past, but about integrating experience, honoring emotion, and cultivating the wisdom born of suffering. The mornings no longer arrived with their familiar ease. Even the sun rising over the city, casting its golden light over streets I had walked countless times, felt different, like a reminder that nothing could remain ordinary again. I had been suspended in grief and reflection for what felt like an eternity, yet every day I knew I had to face a choice: to remain trapped in the echo of betrayal, or to reclaim the fragile threads of my own life and weave them into something that belonged to me. I sat by the window, tea cooling in my hands, watching the world move outside. People hurried to work, children laughed in the park, the mail carrier delivered letters with dutiful regularity. Everything seemed both painfully mundane and profoundly foreign. I realized then that my life had shifted irreversibly, that the rhythm I had once relied upon, the quiet trust, the ordinary routines, had been fractured. And yet, amidst the fracture, there was possibility. I could choose, for the first time in weeks, what my next step would be. Forgiveness loomed first, like a distant horizon I wasn't sure I was ready to approach. I thought of him, the man I had loved, the man who had hurt me so deeply. Could I forgive without erasing the pain? Could I release him from my anger while still honoring my grief? Forgiveness, I realized, was not about absolution for him. It was about freeing myself from the corrosive weight of resentment. It was about reclaiming a portion of my peace, the space to breathe without bitterness constricting every thought. But could I do it? Could I summon the strength to let go, even partially, of the wound that had been carved into my heart? Separation whispered its own possibilities. To walk away, to sever ties with betrayal, to reclaim my home, my routines, my sense of self. It was tempting, in moments of clarity, to imagine the clean lines of independence, the freedom from doubt and deceit. And yet, even in the allure of separation, there was fear. The fear of loneliness, the fear of starting anew, the fear that walking away might leave unanswered questions, lingering shadows that would haunt me in other ways. Separation offered freedom, yes, but at a cost I was not yet ready to fully quantify. Then there was confrontation, the deeper, quieter confrontation within myself. Beyond his actions, beyond the betrayal, beyond the immediate fallout, there was a more subtle, challenging reckoning. To look at my own heart, to understand my boundaries, to recognize the places where trust had been assumed rather than earned. This confrontation required courage, introspection, and honesty, not only about him, but about me. What had I allowed? What had I ignored? What did I need to feel safe again, truly safe, within my own skin? I began writing again, letting my pen trace the jagged edges of thought across the pages of my journal. I wrote about anger, letting it bleed freely onto the paper, vivid and unrestrained. I wrote about sorrow, mapping the contours of heartbreak that had yet to soften. I wrote about love, both the love I still felt and the love I had once taken for granted, now tinged with betrayal. In the act of writing, I felt my agency return, fragment by fragment. Each word was a small assertion: I exist. I feel, I choose. Walking became another form of meditation, a deliberate practice in reclaiming my space. I moved through the city streets with purposeful steps, observing without judgment, noticing without distraction. Each footfall was an act of grounding, each breath a reclamation of autonomy. I allowed myself to notice the ordinary beauty around me, the curve of a tree branch, the ripple of water in the fountain, the rhythm of children's laughter, without needing to attach it to memory, to betrayal, or to longing. In these walks, I discovered the subtle power of presence, the quiet liberation of inhabiting my own life fully, even amidst lingering pain. Boundaries became a central focus of my reflection. I considered what I would and would not tolerate, not merely in my relationship with him, but in all aspects of my life. Emotional safety, I realized, could not be assumed. It had to be actively cultivated. I wrote lists of what felt safe, what felt unsafe, what actions would rebuild trust, and what patterns I would no longer accept. The exercise was both empowering and sobering, a reminder that resilience is cultivated not only through endurance, but through intentional decisions that honor self-worth and integrity. I also began imagining conversations, those yet to come. I envisioned setting clear expectations, asserting limits, and articulating the ways in which trust could be rebuilt, if at all. The imagined dialogues were exercises in preparedness, in asserting agency over my emotional landscape. I knew that real conversations would be unpredictable, raw, and messy, but envisioning them gave me a sense of control, a way to rehearse strength even as uncertainty remained. As I processed, I realized the power of solitude. To face betrayal fully is to confront oneself in a quiet, unguarded space. In moments alone, I could feel every wave of anger, every pang of sorrow, every flicker of lingering love. The emotions were overwhelming at times, yet I allowed them to exist without judgment, without suppression. I recognized that the ability to feel deeply is not a weakness. It is a testament to the depth of my humanity and the richness of my capacity for connection. At night, I sat in the dim glow of my living room, reflecting on the choices ahead. I considered the path of forgiveness, weighed against the safety of separation, and measured both against the ongoing necessity of self-confrontation. I realized that there was no simple, linear answer, no single decision that could instantly resolve the complexity of betrayal. Instead, I had the power to navigate the uncertainty with awareness, to choose actions that prioritized my emotional well-being, to assert autonomy in a situation that had previously felt out of my control. I also thought about trust, its fragility, its resilience, its conditional nature. Trust is not granted blindly. It must be earned and continually maintained. The betrayal I had experienced was a harsh teacher, reminding me that assumptions of loyalty and fidelity are not guarantees, but agreements built upon consistent action, integrity, and respect. In contemplating this, I began to consider the standards I would uphold, the non-negotiables I would insist upon, and the ways in which I could rebuild my life in alignment with my values, regardless of the outcome with him. I noticed subtle shifts in my perception of self. Pain had carved away illusions, yes, but it had also revealed strength I had not fully acknowledged. I could endure heartbreak without losing my sense of dignity. I could reflect on betrayal without becoming consumed by it. I could assert boundaries and insist upon respect while still allowing myself to feel love, compassion, and empathy. These realizations were small but vital victories, subtle markers of empowerment that hinted at the resilience that lay within. The day-to-day moments became opportunities for reclamation. I practiced speaking my truth in small ways, expressing needs, stating preferences, articulating feelings, without hesitation or apology. I cultivated spaces of safety within my home, arranging routines and rituals that reinforced stability. I allowed myself to seek comfort in friends, to lean on confidants, to accept guidance without relinquishing autonomy. Each choice, however minor, was a thread in the larger tapestry of self-assertion and emotional sovereignty. I also reflected on the role of memory and imagination in healing. Revisiting past experiences was necessary, but imagining potential futures became equally vital. I allowed myself to envision a life in which betrayal no longer dictated my sense of self, a life in which boundaries were respected, trust was rebuilt carefully, and my choices determined my emotional trajectory. These imagined possibilities were not guarantees, but they were exercises in agency, proof that the mind can prepare, hope, and aspire, even amidst uncertainty. As the weeks unfolded, I noticed a quiet shift. The intensity of anger softened slightly, though it never disappeared entirely. Grief remained, but it became more manageable, interwoven with moments of clarity, insight, and reflection. I recognized that healing is not linear, that resilience is cultivated gradually, and that empowerment often emerges quietly, through small, deliberate acts of agency and self-preservation. I began to articulate my values with increasing precision. Emotional honesty, mutual respect, clear communication, and personal boundaries became guiding principles. I understood that any future interactions, whether with him or in other relationships, would be informed by these principles. The confrontation, the reflection, and the pain had all served as catalysts, stripping away illusions and revealing the contours of the life I wanted to live, one defined not by betrayal, but by intentional choices and steadfast self-respect. There were moments, of course, when doubt returned, subtle and insistent. Memories of what had been lost, imagined scenarios of what could have been, and the lingering ache of betrayal surfaced unexpectedly, often in quiet, unguarded moments. I allowed these feelings to exist without judgment, acknowledging their presence while refusing to let them dictate my actions. Each wave of doubt became a reminder of resilience, each pang of sorrow a call to reaffirm boundaries, each flicker of fear a signal to trust my own discernment. I also began to notice the beauty of incremental progress. Each day, each decision, each act of self-assertion contributed to a slowly emerging sense of stability. I learned to recognize the power inherent in choice, the ability to determine how I would respond, how I would navigate relationships, how I would cultivate trust and safety. Betrayal had not erased this power. If anything, it had illuminated its importance, compelling me to act with intention, awareness, and courage. Even as I considered forgiveness, separation, and ongoing dialogue, I understood that these were not mutually exclusive. Each path offered opportunities for growth, clarity, and empowerment. The ultimate choice remained uncertain, yet I no longer felt paralyzed by fear or overwhelmed by grief. Instead, I felt a quiet, simmering determination, a commitment to navigate the future with eyes wide open, guided by self-respect, intentionality, and the knowledge that betrayal does not define me, but my choices moving forward do.